All right. Hello, everyone. In this short video, I just want to take a few minutes to show you how you can take advantage of breakpoints within Visual Studio and how you can use them to stop the execution of your program and then take a moment to walk through the lines in your code, the actual program statements, one at a time to see what their effect is on your program, and also as a means then to learn how the computer is actually executing the statements and what's going on inside of your programs as the program is executing. And also using the breakpoints as a debugging tool is super useful, especially in cases where you might not have access to your instructor or another peer that can give you a hand looking at your code. Setting breakpoints and walking through your code on your own is a really good way for yourself to try to figure out problems and understand where things have gone wrong. So to help demonstrate how to use breakpoints in Visual Studio, I've got a really simple program here that we're going to walk through, and some of you might recognize this as a simple practice problem exercise from Lesson 2, where we're asked to write a program that inputs a value from the user, and then it just simply outputs a statement depending on whether or not that value was less than 0 or greater than 0 or is in fact equal to 0. And so in this particular solution, I've included an error so that our program doesn't execute the way that we would expect, and then I'm going to be using the debugging tools to help try and find out what that problem is. And some of you looking at the code here right now will already have an idea of what the problem is, but as we go through it, it'll come to light. So without spending any more time here, I just want to show you first of all how to set breakpoints. And a breakpoint is exactly what it sounds like. It is a point in your program's execution where you would like to break and then be able to inspect what's going on inside the program at that time. And then once you've encountered a breakpoint in your code and effectively the program is paused, you are then in control of how that program is going to progress statement by statement through to the end. So you'll have options to either step over, so execute and step over the statement that you're on, and then continue to do that right through to the end. You can also just stop the program entirely. You could also just choose to continue the program without walking through statement by statement or until you hit another breakpoint. So I'm going to just demonstrate here briefly setting a single breakpoint, but you can set as many breakpoints in as many different places as you find necessary to try and help understand or find problems within your program. The one rule to keep in mind here is that you can only set breakpoints on statements that have some kind of an effect. So right here on line 9, I'm declaring an integer variable called value, and if you go left of the gutter here, there's another column that's empty at the moment. And if you try to click in there, nothing's going to happen. And if you look close to the bottom in the status bar, I get a little message that says a breakpoint could not be inserted, and then it trails off. And basically, it just can't insert something here because there's no statement for it to really execute. But if we go down to line 11 and we click in that same location, you'll see we get a nice red dot that appears in that column. And here it shows me the location within the file and the line. And then the statement that breakpoint is set on is now highlighted in red. Okay. I also get a visual cue over here in my scroll bar for the program window. The little red square indicates that I've got a breakpoint set at this point. And that's really it. You can toggle your breakpoints by clicking on them again. So clicking sets and resets. And if you right click anywhere in this column, oops. Is it just settings? No, I don't want this. I'm confusing this with my Mac version. Sorry. If you're on the Mac, you can right click in there. But for this Windows version, I can't right click to get access to all my breakpoints. If you just click on the column here, you could set and then toggle them by unsetting. Clicking on the breakpoint. And there's also a debug menu at the very top of Visual Studio that you can use to work through these. So if you go to the debug menu up at the top, here you'll see options for working with your breakpoints. So toggling a breakpoint on a particular line is F9. You can create a new breakpoints, okay? And then also deleting or disabling all breakpoints. So those are options that are presented here in this debug menu. If you're on your Mac and you set your breakpoint in the gutter over here, if you right click on the gutter, you get options to disable and toggle and do all of that directly from here. But I'm unable to right click here in the Windows version. So again, forgive me, I'm switching back and forth between these platforms. But once that breakpoint is set, if we want to then run our program and have it pause on the statement, we need to make sure we run it in debug mode. And so that's kind of the default and what we've been doing so far in this course. If we click on the drop down here, we get options to just kind of run our programs, but we don't get more information. If you click on the debug menu, again, you'll see that the solid green triangle that we see in this menu option here in the toolbar is to start debugging, okay? If you were to run your program without debugging, which is Control F5, and here kind of the hollow green triangle, you wouldn't get these features. So the default is fine as long as you've got the solid green arrow. You could choose this option. If you don't, or you use Control F5, then you can go from the debug menu and just choose to start debugging, or simply F5. And that's what that does. So if we do that now, it'll start our program, and right away it jumps back from the terminal or from the command prompt into Visual Studio. And that's because the first statement it's come across now is the statement to do the write line. I'm going to toggle back here so we can kind of just see, and I've left some space over here to show this to you, what happens as we walk through the program. So we're paused right now, okay? And you can see there's process memory and processing power, some internals, some diagnostics as to what's going on inside your computer. And we also have a current statement marker. That's this yellow arrow over here showing us where we are currently in the program, okay? One other important thing to note when you're in the debug mode here is something called the locals window. And if you don't see this locals window, it's nowhere on the screen, you can access that from the debug menu, Windows, and all of the various windows that are available for debugging are here. Locals you would find right here at this position. But I do see it, so that's fine. And inside the locals window, you'll see any local variables that have been declared and are in the current scope. Okay, and we haven't talked too much about scope. We'll cover that more when we get into modularization of our programs, but you can see the int variable called value appears here in my locals window. You can see here the default value for that variable is 0, and it is an int type. So as we work through the program, you can see live what the values are that are in different variables, so you can double check. Maybe you've assigned a value to a wrong variable, or a variable that you thought should have it but doesn't. You can check all those values in this locals window. And so the next step here is to say, okay, this is great. I'd like to execute this statement. So let's step over this statement to the next one so that we can continue working through. And up at the top, you'll see controls for working in the debug mode. So up here, the red square to stop debugging. And then over here on the right, we see some options for stepping. And you can step into, which is useful for method calls. You can step out if you're in a method call and you want to return to the caller. Again, we haven't talked about creating our own methods yet, so those are not useful today. But the one that we do want to work with here is the step over, or F10. So when we click on this icon, we're going to execute this statement. We're going to step over to the next one, and we should see the result of that statement appear in our terminal. So let's step over, and sure enough, we get to now see that write line statement has been executed. We can see the output in the terminal, and we've now current statement cursor is moved down, and we can see, okay, now we're at this position, right? And we've got some updates here in terms of CPU and process, but this is not super important at the moment. Okay, so we can just continue in this way, step over this line, and then we get the blank line, and now we're going to get the prompt. So here's where things get a little bit interactive. So if we step over the right prompt, we see the text, but we can't really step over this statement, right? It's expecting us to input something. So if we choose to step over on this line, we lose the current statement cursor. It's gone. And now we can see there's process memory, there's a timeline moving. And that's because it's waiting for us to execute this console readline method. So we've got to now at this time come back here. We can enter in our number. So I'm going to enter in a -1 and press enter. And that completes the readline statement, which assigns the -1 to value and then moves down to the next statement. And we can double check this. So you can see down in the locals window what's kind of happened. And here now our value variable no longer has a value of 0. It has a value of -1. So we can track the assignment of variables kind of in real time as you work through the program, which again is very useful in terms of debugging to ensure that you're putting putting values into the right variables at the right time. And so now we're at the statement where I know I've entered a negative value. I'm going to expect that this statement executes so that we do see that the value -1 is less than 0. And I may feel that I've created this condition properly. And so I'm going to expect that when I step over, we end up in here. But when I do that, as we skip over this entirely and we jump down to the next conditional check. And so I might be scratching my head like, that's not what I expected at all. There's clearly something wrong with the condition. So now I can kind of identify where in my program there's a problem. Okay, it's not up here where my title is. It's not with the variable declaration. It's not with how I input the value. There's something wrong here. So it helps to narrow down where we want to look in the program before we just start changing a whole pile of things in other areas that have no effect on the problem that we actually have here. And so we could continue to step over, and if I do, we'll find out that this condition actually yields true, which is not what I expected at all. So now I know, there must be something wrong with the relational operator that I've chosen here. And if we step over again, we're going to output now that -1 is greater than 0, which of course is not true. And that ends our branching statement. So we would not expect to see the next one. We should jump to the end where I've just got a series of right lines for no other reason than there. So that's it. At this point, we can continue to just walk over these statements, but it's at the end of the program. I don't want to do that. If you just click on the green continue button, that will continue to play out the statements without the interaction from the user. So we do that and it goes through, does those 3 right line statements, and then our program ends. Okay, and so now that we've gone through, I've debugged it, I know what kind of changes I want to make, we can come back in here, we can swap these less than and greater than symbols and save our changes. And now to test it again to make sure that it works, I don't want to use my breakpoint up here. There's nothing wrong up at this part of the program. So I'm going to toggle that breakpoint and I'm going to create another breakpoint here where I expect the fix to be able to be checked. Right, so this is again a good use of breakpoints. So maybe start at the beginning, and then once you've narrowed it down to, it's not here at the beginning, it's the further down that the problem occurs, you can put your breakpoint at that location so that it won't start asking you to step over until this place here. So I've done that. I'll once again go into debugging mode. It's going to take a moment. Okay, and so here we go. So it's skipped over the title. We've gone to the prompt, which we can see here. I'm going to again enter -1. And now we don't jump out of the program execution into debug until we hit this statement here. And so now we can test whether or not the change that I've introduced is going to fix the program. So I would expect that this is true now. And sure enough, okay, great. I entered -1. It is going to tell me that the value is -1. Awesome. And then I could choose to play out the rest of the program if there was more interaction that I was interested in, or if this is all I wanted to test, and now that I'm satisfied it works, oops, I accidentally clicked the play button, so let's just try that again. Okay, so we step over, it works. I don't need to run this program any further. I'm just going to stop debugging. So I'm going to click that, and that's just going to kick it right out of there. Okay, so notice we don't see any output. It just ends the program at that place and time so that you can get back to developing. Okay, and then I'm going to remove this breakpoint, and there we go. I'm good. So I hope you found that somewhat useful. Again, the best way to get comfortable with this is to use it. So I would encourage you to go back through even just the programs that we would have created during the lectures and experiment a little bit with how you can set breakpoints and step over code statements, exploring your locals window to see what values are assigned to variables, etc., etc. And of course, if you have any difficulty or troubles with this, please don't hesitate to let your instructor know. All right, I'll see you in the next video.